Hey guys, and welcome to Quality Shot. And I've got with me Aaron, the cricket connoisseur, and we're going to be going over the Ashes. Of course, as Aaron has rightfully said to me, Australia won 4-0 in the end. Aaron, how you doing?
Yeah, quite well, to be honest, mate. Today, for those who don't know, the 20th of January, it's County Cricket Fixtures Day. So, found out those, which we've been waiting months for those. So, that's been a very, very pleasant surprise today. Found out that Warwickshire, my county, have got Surrey, first game of the season, at Fortress Edgbaston. So, that'll be a fantastic game to kickstart the title defence. But yeah, we're here to talk about the Ashes. And unfortunately, from an English perspective at least, a pretty disastrous series. With that being said, though, fair play to Australia. They deserve all the credit, all the plaudits. They were absolutely sensational. And as we'll discuss throughout today's show, they were definitely worthy winners of this particular series.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, talking on the County Championship, I'm sure we will touch upon that as well because there's a lot of talk about the
How long have you
format.
got?
Sorry?
How long have you got?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know how long it got. But of course, it's something that myself and you especially have talked about in the past about the format and of the English game. But we'll touch upon that a bit later. But first of all, were you surprised by the result, the series result?
No, not really. Not after the Gabba. And I'm going to be
Yeah.
honest, before the series, I was being optimistic. It was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, to be honest. A prediction of 3-2, but everything just went wrong. Everything went wrong, literally from ball one, when Mitchell Starc got Rory Burns out. And from there on out, that was pretty much a marker for how the rest of the series was going to pan out. A great stat, Faizan. You know me. I love my stats as a cricket badger. That was the first time that an opening batsman has been dismissed on the first ball of an Ashes series since the 1936-37 Ashes, when Derbyshire's Stan Worthington was dismissed by Ernie McIntosh at the Gabba. And yeah, as I said, it was almost like a bad omen, to be honest, for England heading into this series, and it didn't really improve from there. We had a little bit of a fight back in Sydney, but the rest of the series was just so one-sided. I expected Australia to win, if I'm being honest. As an England
Yeah.
fan, I wanted to put that prediction out there just to, gee everyone up a bit, have a bit of fun. But I didn't expect us to actually win, and the way in which we lost, though, I think that's the most disappointing bit. I could have taken a 3-1 or a 3-2, but to lose 4-0, and it easily could have been 5-0. Without the rain in Sydney, England probably would have lost that test match as well. So incredibly disappointing. We've got a lot to improve upon heading into the West Indies tour and, of course, the home summer beyond that. And yeah, again, I keep on coming back to that word, but just so disappointing, so flat, so underwhelming. It really was not an enjoyable series at all from an English perspective.
Yeah, agreed. We'll go into that, I'm sure, in more depth. And obviously, Australia coming into it, there was the whole Tim Paine situation, then Pat Cummins coming in as captain. There's a lot of uncertainty on how they were going to, one, conduct themselves on the field, but also play their cricket, etc. as well. I know he missed one test match because obviously he tested positive. Steve Smith stepped in. He did quite a good job, or a very good job, whilst he was there as well. But I think talking about Pat Cummins and the captaincy, etc., I thought he captained pretty well throughout, and obviously led by example as well. He was the highest wicket taker of the series with 21 wickets, which is not bad going at an average of 18. So not bad at all for, in my eyes, the best test bowler around at the moment. But I think he's ranked that. But whether he is or you want Bumrah or whoever else, he's definitely up there. He is quality. Were you surprised as well? Because I think the Australians in general, they have a little bit of fire about them, but it seems like they have, I think, cut out a bit of the carry-on, which was a bit unnecessary maybe in the past. And yes, there is still this competitive edge, but it's now, you know what, we're in control and we're not going to kind of break past that, especially, I guess, given the scrutiny that they were under. Tim Paine was a little bit edgy as a captain. Pat Cummins seems to be someone who's, let's just do our talking with the cricket rather than having to chirp a lot all the time.
Again, though, you could argue that started under Tim Paine's leadership, because for those who've seen the test, fantastic documentary series, cannot recommend it enough. There's that wonderful scene in the meeting room, and I think it's been memed to Living Eternity, the plenty of abuse, no banter. No, sorry, plenty of banter, no abuse. That's what it is from Justin Langer. We cricket. have put it on a load of merch as well, and that's the sort of culture now that exists within that Australian dressing room. I did see a lot of people saying they've lost their edge, the intensity, the sledging as well. It was a lot less prevalent in this series, but you know what? They let the ball do the talking. They let the bat do the talking, and they dominated again from ball one. They were absolutely sensational in this series. And talking of Pat Cummins as a leader, leading so brilliantly from the front, you've mentioned it already, 21 wickets at 18 in this Ashes series. You couldn't really ask for more. He was absolutely phenomenal, and I loved his field placements. When I compare the two captains, Joe Root is the more experienced captain, and yet in this series, he was a lot more conservative, a lot more safe with his field placements, not as aggressive, not as attacking. If you looked at Pat Cummins, his field placements were almost like his bowling. Aggressive, ruthless, not allowing any breathing space at all, and I thought he did a magnificent job. So for that reason, Pat Cummins, I think he'll be a long-term captain now for Australia. I like his style. I like the way in which he conducts himself, both on and off the pitch as well. He's an ideal role model, really, to have in that particular role for Australia at the moment. So, yeah, next to Pat Cummins' name, a big, massive tick. I thought he was absolutely sensational.
Yeah, suffocating fields, and as you mentioned rightfully, just like his bowling. And I mean, phenomenal bowler. I wax lyrical about him all the time because he's just that good, I think. I guess we're talking about captains, you may as well talk about Joe Root. Obviously, it seems like there was a lot. It left a lot to be desired, I think, a lot of his choices and decisions. And I think, people were saying, you're being a bit harsh because, not to me, but as into the general media, because it's not really his fault that England aren't getting runs and etc. And obviously he's the highest run scorer. I think he scored 322 runs at 32, which is the highest of any other England player. And he's carried really England's batting for the whole of 2021. He did it as well. So yes, with the bat, he's been phenomenal. He had one of his best ever years, probably his best ever year, in Test cricket. But as a captain, I think if we solely look at that point, there were some definitely questionable decisions. I mean, how did you see it? And what do you think about the calls for him to step down as captain? Is there even a viable replacement?
Well, I'll start with the first question to begin with before we get into potential replacement captains. I'll offer my thoughts on that in due course. But when it comes to Root's captaincy, I look back to 2019 and what we'd do under his leadership. And again, it happened in 2020. When we were playing teams that were ranked lower than us, we were the team on the front foot. He'd set really aggressive fields, and you could see this against the likes of Pakistan, the West Indies, South Africa, when he put in that ingenious leg slip to Rassie van der Dusen at Newlands, and that sparked a batting collapse for England to win the game on day 5 and eventually win that series. When we're playing teams which are ranked higher than us, which on paper are stronger than us, he massively goes into his shell. And I think that really does cost England at times. If you look in this series, and one particular aspect of his captaincy in particular, which is heavily scrutinised, is his use of the spin bowlers. And there was no better example of this than in Melbourne, and it was Jack Leach's field. Jack Leach's fields throughout this entire series were so safe, overly conservative. If you compare the two captains with regards to how they use their spinners, and yes, before someone comments, I'm well aware that Nathan Lyon, who's played 105 test matches, is a better test bowler than Jack Leach. But with that being said, Australia set him up to succeed. I don't think England necessarily do that with Jack Leach. If you look at the field, so many men on the boundary, it looked like we were playing a T20 game, not an Ashes test match. Compared to the Australians, Pat Cummins was getting in a leg slip, a short leg, a silly point, a silly mid-on. He's getting in 1 or 2 slips so that they were making chances. They were really cramming the England batters for room at the crease. And I just think, again, that is something which historically, if you look back, this isn't just with Jack Leach. He's done this with Don Bess. He's done it with Moeen Ali as well in 2019. And this is something we're entering Joe Root's, 4th year of captaincy now, in terms of properly at the helm of this England test side. And he hasn't improved in that regard. And I do think questions have to be asked. with regards to that facet of his game. He's wonderful. We know him with the bats. He's one of the best, if not the best, ever produced here in England and Wales. But you can't just be the captain off of those performances alone. That's half of it. And he's doing that. He's exceeding expectations in that. He's been absolutely phenomenal. That isn't what people are questioning. It's the field placements, it's the bowling rotations, and that's the other half of the game, which is just as important. Because if you're not taking wickets, it doesn't matter how many runs you're scoring, because the rest of the batting isn't backing him up. If you're not taking wickets, you're not going to be competitive. And that is exactly what's cost England, along with the fragile batting, in this particular series.
Yeah, no, very well said. Very well said. I think, lack of maybe evolution and also desire to take on the bigger boys and actually be adventurous with his fielding settings and also tactics is definitely costing them. Because if you go in with the attitude that, oh, they're already better than us and we're already at a deficit, then you're never going to end up winning, right? It's, as they say, if you don't buy a ticket, you'll never win the lottery. So, I think 100% agree with you. And then in terms of, I guess I'm kind of fast forwarding into it because I know we're going to talk a bit more about the Ashes specifically, but a lot of people saying about him stepping down. But I think obviously you can only ask someone to step down if you have a viable replacement. Do they have a viable replacement? People talking about Stokes, and look, I mean, Stokes has been in and out of the side for a long time. Obviously, he's had his off-field issues, and then understandably, he took a break for mental health, which is of course understandable. He's had a few injuries as well, and he's not really kind of incorporated back into the side fully yet, anyways. And then apart from that, England's batting is all over the place. So they look at a batsman and they look at the bowlers and you say, well, you don't want to give it to Anderson Broad because I think it's probably well known they kind of they've probably got a little bit of an ego about them, and most likely they'll go a very interesting way, let's say, as captain, and they don't have many years left anyways. So what would you do then? And do you think it's even viable for him to be stepping down at this point?
Well, I've said this on multiple podcasts and shows. I think for the time being, Root will remain as England captain, but I think that'll just be almost to prepare the next captain. I'm not sure if I see him as a long-term option anymore, because don't get me wrong, I've said this again, his batting, outstanding. This is nothing against Joe Root. He's one of England's greatest ever cricketers, and we're very privileged to have him in our test team. But I just feel like at the moment, his captaincy, the reason why he's keeping this position, for the time being, he could prove us wrong, and I'd love him to prove me wrong. But I think it's out of necessity as opposed to want. I don't think we have another viable option in and around that squad. If you look at the candidates, 3 jump off the page straight away. One of them is Ben Stokes. He's a leader. He leads from the front. He's an X-Factor player. But for me personally, I want Ben Stokes to just be Ben Stokes. Go and win us some matches. Go and get us some breakthrough wickets. Go and put in these magnificent individual performances. That's his role in the side. He doesn't need captaincy on top. It's far too much pressure to put on one person, and we saw it in the past with Freddie Flintoff. It didn't necessarily work. Just because someone is your best player in terms of a 3-dimensional perspective, I suppose, it doesn't mean they're going to be the best captain. So I hope England don't fall into that trap. If you then look at someone like Rory Burns has won the county championship in 2018 with Surrey. If you would have asked me this question a couple of years ago, potentially his name would have been in the mix. But as of 2022, he looks to have fallen massively out of favour with this England team. He doesn't look like he's going to be playing in the Caribbean. I'm not sure he's going to play in the summer. And if someone, isn't sure of their place, you can't just make them the captain. I don't think that would work at all. So Rory Burns is another contender who's eliminated. And then the third, I suppose there's 2 you could go with. Jos Butler is another one because of his vice-captaincy, and he has led teams in the past. But again, his place isn't assured. You've got Ben Foakes breathing down his neck in the test side. And then there's Stuart Broad, who, again, this is a pattern which is cropping up. Stuart Broad could be an interesting leader. He's a strong character. He's a feisty character. He's going to give it his all on the field. But he's not going to play every single game because England have that ridiculous strength in depth in the seam department. So for the time being, England, I don't think will replace Joe Root. He's definitely going to be the captain for the West Indies. But what England have got to do is almost create some competitiveness, some competition for Joe Root. And that's going to come from the England Lions. I wonder if that's going to be Alex Lees. Now, Alex Lees isn't the captain for Durham. That's Scott Borthwick, who, funnily enough, used to play for England in 2013, that was, and didn't quite kick on, unfortunately. But he captains the England Lions. So it'll be interesting to see if England maybe put his name into the mix. I know there's been reports that he is meant to be on that plane to the Caribbean in March. So watch out for Alex Lees. He could be a potential replacement. And then with the Lions again, I talk about nurturing that leader. There's multiple in county cricket. You just have to look for them. And there's 4 that I can think of straight away. You've got James Vince from Hampshire, leads his side beautifully. We know what he's like in Test cricket, though. He is a little bit inconsistent, so you do have to take that into consideration. You've got Tom Abel, who's been in the England Lions for a couple of years now. Really, really good captain of Somerset. And the thing that I love about Tom Abel, he knows how to utilise spinners, as we've seen with Jack Leach and Don Bess in county cricket. So his name would also be in the mix. And then 2 outside options, I suppose they'd be in the Mike Brearley bracket. You bring them in purely for captaincy. But Chris Dent from Gloucestershire, he's an opening batsman, first-class average of 37. He's been outstanding for years for Gloss. And also Will Rhodes. Will Rhodes, the county championship winning captain in 2021 with Warwickshire, who's very versatile. He's got a golden arm. He can bat anywhere from 1 to 5. Those are options. England, we don't have an excuse of we don't have any leaders. We don't have any captains. It's just about nurturing them and putting them in at the right time to offer up that competition for Joe Root, because I think that will bring out the best of him as a captain.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's just no real, as you rightfully said, no real definites to come in, and you think, oh, you know what, they could definitely see him coming in now to make something happen, and that's why I agree. I think Steve Smith, I definitely agree that Joe Root will be... will definitely, in short term anyway, be the captain, and I'm sure they will nurture someone. I guess focusing a little bit more on the Ashes specifically. So before we get into, which I know you will love talking about in terms of the format and the county system, etc., and what changes should or need to be made to that, which have been clearly voiced by Chris Silverwood and Joe Root. And again, maybe this is just me missing certain things coming out, but I feel like that's fine and they have a point, but I almost feel like there's a massive deflection from themselves to say, well, the county system is rubbish, so that's why we played badly, but rather than looking at themselves and saying this is what we've done wrong. And I haven't really seen many articles, many interviews where they've actually said, you know what, we got it wrong, or this is what we could have done better. We hold our hands up. We need to look at ourselves as a whole, as the ECB, and I need to sit down with Ashley Giles and Chris Silverwood saying, and I'm thinking, you're the head coach and you're the head selector. It would be nice if you actually came out and said, we've just been stuffed 4-0. I'll hold my hands up and say, you know what, I clearly got something wrong. But instead it was, I know my position might be in danger, but, the county system needs to change. And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? It's really... it just seems very, very political rather than actually, being honest in their assessment of what's gone on. And Joe Root, I think, normally he's quite good, but he did say, I think, a bit more than Chris Silverwood about where things may have gone wrong. But again, he almost voiced the same concerns about the system, which I feel like is not the right time after you just lost to say that. It's almost like an excuse straight away to say, well, that's why we've lost. From your point of view, what are the issues? If you completely put the county system and that whole situation to one side, because we can talk about that, but that's a long-term thing as well, let's be honest. In this series, what do you think England could have done better with the players they had? Let's forget about bringing in other players. Let's just say, with the players that they had on the plane going to Australia, it's not ideal they didn't have Archer and Stone, fine. But what could they have done better during the series? And could they have performed better with the players they had? Or was it a case of, you know what, they're always doomed to lose the way they did?
Well, I think the squad wasn't the best in county cricket. And I remember, I think it was after the Melbourne Test, so England had lost the series by then. It was 3-0. And I believe it was Joe Root came out in an interview and he said that these were the 18 best players in county cricket. I wouldn't agree with that. But then again, that's very subjective. People would disagree with my choices. We're a game that's based on opinion. So just keep that in mind. There is a grey area. With regards to selection, everyone has their own different thoughts and feelings on that. Personally speaking, England got lots wrong in this series, and I think first and foremost was lack of application. The amount of times I mentioned this on my local radio station, how many times in this series did that English top six just waft the bat at, balls on fifth or sixth stump lines, just gifting away wickets? And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter if you've got the best domestic circuit. It doesn't matter if you've got the best coaches, you've got the best pitches, best squads, best whatever, best performance pathways as well. If you're doing that in a game, you're going to get into trouble. It's as simple as that. So lack of application. If you watch the difference between someone like Marnus Labuschagne and Travis Head compared to that English top six, bar Joe Root, there were leagues between them in terms of the way in which they battled at the crease. They knew when to attack. They knew when to defend. They knew when to leave. And that's something which England have got to learn from this series. Not every single delivery is a scoring shot. You can't just throw the bat out when you think it's there. You have to judge that so carefully because your wicket is your most valuable currency in Test cricket. If you look in this particular series, England did not score a single 300 plus run total, which is ridiculous. And that's a massive reason why. So lack of application, absolutely. I'd say that is the key factor in terms of the on-field stuff, which has led to England's downfall in this series. The second one, I have to say it, poor selection. Really poor selection. In Adelaide and Brisbane in particular, we didn't play Stuart Broad at the Gabba, which everyone was absolutely shocked about. That surface is ideal for Stuart Broad, and it's the first game of the Ashes as well. He's always going to be fired up. He's going to give it that extra edge, that extra chirp to the Australians. He's going to get into the fight, and yet he wasn't picked. And then in the second test in particular, I could not believe that England dropped Jack Leach. I couldn't believe it. You're going to Australia with a frontline spinner to the Adelaide Oval, the one surface in Australia where spin bowlers come into the game, and we didn't pick a frontline spinner. How is that to do with county cricket? You can blame that all you like, right? And there are genuine issues here in England and Wales, in our circuit, which need to be rectified. I'm not, for 1 second denying that. In fact, I'd agree with certain things with regards to the pitches, with regards to scheduling as well. But you have to pick your best 11. And England in this series, I don't think got that correct at all. So that would be the second reason. And then the third reason I'd say was the environment. And I'm not sure if you've read the articles on this, Faizan, but something came out the other day. I think it was in the Telegraph or the Evening Standard. Not sure exactly which newspaper it was, but it was the Telegraph. It was the Telegraph because it was paywalled. It wasn't the Evening Standard. But it was like a little segment with regards to Ollie Pope, who, as we know, struggled in this particular series. That's Chris Silverwood on the phone calling me up for the West Indies. But in terms of the environment in this particular series, I don't think it was healthy at all. And that was really summarised by this particular quote from Ollie Pope. He wanted to fly in Vikram Solanki, who was based in London, all the way to Australia to give him some coaching and some batting practice because he felt like the coaches on that tour, in that squad, were not backing him. What a ridiculous thing that is. How can you not back and give support? I know that he's been in bad form, but Ollie Pope is still a fantastic batsman on his day. He's got test centuries, right? Yeah. That incredible knock in Port Elizabeth, that comes to mind immediately. And he's got a first-class average of 60. Granted, that hasn't quite necessarily translated, but the guy is a talented cricketer, and yet you haven't backed him. And again, this comes to selection. Why was Dan Lawrence not selected? They threw Ollie Pope out to the proverbial Sharks in that fifth test. Dan Lawrence scored a century the last time he was in Australia for the England Lions, and he wasn't picked. So I just wonder about that environment, the amount of times that England just came out onto the field with no energy at all. They looked as though they would capitulate. They looked defeated from ball one. I don't think that environment, and I know that the people involved, I don't think that they're nasty guys at all. In fact, I'd say the opposite. Silverwood, for all intents and purposes, is a lovely bloke, as is Joe Root. I've heard, positive things about Graham Thorpe as well. You could hear that on Nasser Hussain's vodcast, Sky Sports the other day.
Yeah.
But there must be something in that working environment which is really, really off-putting for these players, and it's not getting the best out of them. And that needs to change immediately heading into the rest of this year.
Yeah, that's really shocking to hear. Actually, I didn't know that. I think if you're you're actually asking someone to fly halfway across the world to come and coach you when you're with your, with your country, who's supposed to have the best setup, the best kind of support there for you, then it says a lot about the faith that Ollie Pope has in the coaches for England, and then maybe also, as you said, the support that he's getting there as well. And it's pretty shocking to hear, honestly. And yeah, I mean, Graham Thorpe was a fantastic batsman, and I'm not sure whether some people don't get on with others, and that's fine. But you should always have a good working relationship. It's just a question of whether people's attentions are more fixated on certain batsmen. I'm sure Joe Root takes a lot of time, which is understandable. He's the best bat in the of the team. But I don't know how they're segregating their time or sectioning their time off and etc. with the youngsters. And with Ollie Pope, as you said, he kind of was thrown to the sharks really in the 5th Test match. But yeah, very interesting one, and I think application is 100% correct. I mean, if you just waft your bat out there and nick off, you can do that in any conditions, and you will lose wickets in Test match cricket. It's simple. And I think the batsmen, the fact that they didn't manage to score a collective score over 300 says a lot. I know Stuart Broad and James Anderson's had a lot to say about that, which is why I don't think they'd be very good captains. But
this is the issue, though, Faizan. And again, this comes into your original point, which is that blame culture. And it's something which I absolutely hate when it comes to English cricket. No one ever takes accountability for themselves. It's always someone else. They always pass the buck. They always pass the buck. If it's not the coach's fault, it's the selector's fault when Ed Smith was the selector. If it's not the selector's fault, it's Ashley Giles. If it's not Giles' fault, it's the ECB. The ECB then pass on the blame to county cricket. It's never the individual. You're playing professional sport. At the end of the day, for us as fans, we're not going to hold it against you if you just turn around, put your hands up and say, we messed up. In fact, I think people would actually respect that. They'd appreciate the honesty. They'd appreciate the accountability and the fact that you're going to put things into place to make sure that doesn't happen. And yet instead, there is this constant blame culture. And we see it all the time with the scapegoating of players. We saw it in the 2019 Ashes with Moeen Ali. We saw it in 2021 with Dom Bess in Ahmedabad. We saw it in summer 2021 with Dom Sibley, and the guy was hammered into the ground by our media. When is it going to end? That's what I should be focusing on first and foremost. If I was in that England camp, that needs to go immediately. We need a cultural reset in that regard. It's not healthy, it's not helpful, and clearly it's having a massive impact on how these players are performing.
No, agreed. And yeah, as you've rightfully said, it's not just the media. The only reason why the media are able to pick up on this in the first place and really drill it home is because the players give them the ammunition. The people like. I couldn't believe that Stuart Broad and Anderson had said that, to be honest with you. It was just incredible to hear two really experienced bowlers who are legends of the game, legends for England. And you would think they've played in lots of winning sides. They've won Ashes series in the past, and they should know better that you're a team, right? And it was almost as if they wanted to distance themselves from this series and team and say, well, anything bad that happens, it's not to do with us. Our batsmen are rubbish, basically, so we're going to lose. We're doing our business and you guys aren't. And that was a very, it was a shocking thing to hear and see. And part of me then thinks that, yes, Root's probably a really, really nice guy, but as a captain, is he strong enough? Would he have had words with Broad and Anderson? I doubt it. I cannot see that happening whatsoever. I can't see him saying to them, look, guys, can you avoid from saying that? Because, we're a collective team. And when the other guys look at it, especially the batsmen, it really, as from a confidence point of view, it just knocks them even more. I think he just lets it go and then says, well, they're senior guys, we've got to let it go. So, yeah, the blame culture is clearly something that needs to be sorted out, and you can't win series or become the best team in the world by having a culture that stinks of just being completely devoid of any responsibility every time you play. And if anything goes wrong, you just say, as you said, pass the buck to someone else. And it's a simple thing in club cricket. You can't do it, people get completely bollocked in club cricket for saying that, right? Oh, you guys didn't do that. And it's like, no, guys are a team. This is international elite cricket, right? At the highest level. That actually is supposed to be the pinnacle of Test cricket in some people's eyes. So if that's the case, it shouldn't be happening. But yeah, enough about that anyways. In terms of the performers, or the top performers, obviously for Australia, Scott Bolland was a huge find. I mean, 18 wickets at an average of 9.55, not bad at all. Really, really impressive. And he came in, and to be fair, everyone was saying, you got to bowl 90 plus miles an hour, and he came along and he bowled mid 80s, but he just did enough. He hit the deck hard, he bowled the right areas, and got wickets. And
it's ironic, isn't it?
It is ironic. It is. He's basically the type of bowler that a lot of people are saying you can't get wickets with, and England believed it and get wickets, right? But Scott Bolland came in and made it look easy, and he performed really well. And that's just another person they have. I mean, Jai Richardson came in for a test match, played really well. Obviously, Michael Neser finally got his test cap and managed to pick up a wicket. I don't think we'll ever see him play test cricket again, unfortunately, because of Scott Bolland. He's one of the most unlucky test bowlers, well, fast bowlers that Australia have had. But Scott Bolland obviously is now in the mix. Travis Head, obviously man of the series, averaged 59.5 or 60, let's say then. Most runs at 357, and he's now moved up to number 5 in the test rankings. So all good for him after there were question marks over whether he was going to even be in the side. And then the batting was so sorry they could just bring in Hawaja, and he just scored twin hundreds in the test match, the first test match he came into. So they're looking okay. They're looking pretty good from that aspect. Those must be huge pluses, right, for Australia when there were huge question marks going into it.
100%. And I mentioned this on Ashjad's channel, actually, funnily enough, Faizan, with regards to the importance of Travis Head, because he was coming into this series in some really bad form, domestically speaking. I'm talking about in the county championship for Sussex, he averaged 18.3. And again, a certain bowler got him out, Darren Stevens, a man who, for some reason, people are criticising. Okay, just because he's 45 and still taking wickets, he has nothing to do with this Ashes series. So
how can you criticise him? Oh, sorry, you stopped getting wickets. It's like he can only bowl the conditions he's got. Like, it's not his fault. Like, if you want to make fun of the conditions and then the county system, fine. But he's getting bucket loads of wickets. Go and face him and see how easy it is to face him, right? Marnus Labuschagne kept on getting out to him as well.
He did. He got out to him twice at Sophia Gardens, and he said he was an incredibly skillful seam bowler. But again, coming back on track with Travis Head, so important. In an Ashes series, we all know that first game is pivotal. It's the one where, as a touring side, you have to win. You have to win it, otherwise you're on the back foot straight away. It's incredibly difficult to wrestle back that momentum as the series goes on. And he comes out to bat, and he goes and hits, I think, the 3rd or 4th fastest century in Ashes history. Bear in mind that the Ashes has been going on now since 1882. That's rather impressive, to say the least. So Travis Head, absolutely outstanding. And I'll talk about application. Both him and Marnus Labuschagne, the real role models, the real, the people to emulate from an application perspective. Their temperament was fantastic. I love the fight that they showed at the crease. And again, it was that ability to know when to leave, when to defend, when to attack. And Travis Head, when he started attacking, that ball was just flying to the boundary. So honestly, for me, worthy player of the series. I thought he was absolutely outstanding. And that's Scott Bolland. Scott Bolland, a man I've been watching for years in the Sheffield Shield for Victoria. I didn't expect him to play in this series. That was a masterstroke from the Australians. Really, really was. No one would have expected Scott to turn up at the MCG and let alone, take 6 for 5 on the Boxing Day test. He was remarkable. And again, he kept it so simple, didn't he? And yes, again, Australia did take the chances. I know they did drop a couple of catches in that 5th and final test, but in those first 3, they were on it from ball 1 right until the end of the day's play, taking all the chances, creating run-out opportunities as well. I thought they were exceptional in the field, and that really, kind of gave Scott Bolland a lot of good backing on the pitch itself. He was great. He was really, really good. The only question, I suppose, with regards to Scott Bolland is, does he have a long-term future in the Australian seam attack? Because you've already got 3 of the best seam bowlers on the planet with the likes of
Yeah.
Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins. You've got one of the greatest spinners on the planet right now as well in Nathan Lyon. And as if that wasn't enough, Cam Green, I think he deserves a mention as well because he matured so brilliantly throughout this series. We saw glimpses of it in the Border Gavaskar Trophy Series in 2020-21. This Australian summer, he really came to the forefront. He had Joe Root on tender hooks, which is such a difficult thing to do. In fact, I'd say he's one of the first bowlers that I've seen do it so consistently in a particular series. And then he's batting as well. And a really interesting thing, again, I'm a bit of a badger, so I took great interest in this. Ricky Ponting did an analysis piece on Channel 7, I believe it was, talking about him opening up his stance. Cam Green watched it. He watched that back. He implemented it into his own style. He put it into the nets. He had words with the Australian coaches. And then he goes and scores a couple of 50s. That shows to me a really mature, a really promising talent. So, again, Cam Green, Scott Bolland, Marnus Labuschagne, Travis Head, all outstanding, as were the rest of the Australians.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a really good point about Cam Green. It shows that he's willing to learn, take things on board and adapt, and not just say, oh, I'll wait until after the series because it's too risky. He said, no, I'm going to do it now. Let's go do it now. In the middle of the series, it moves so quickly, cricket at this time as well. There's so much cricket going on. Let's do it now. Ricky Ponting, one of the best to ever do it. I'm going to listen to him. And it paid off. And it's funny because he is seen still now as a batting all-rounder given his, his, what's it called? I guess not county. What's it?
Shield.
Sorry, Shield. Format. I've got the word. The Shield format. And his stats there, I mean, he's scored runs for days. I mean,
I think
for the
he
last couple of
averages
years.
nearly 60 for
Yeah,
Western
it's
Australia.
ridiculous. I mean,
Serious
he's just a gun
prospect.
bat. Yeah, he's a serious player. And then obviously he's pretty damn handy with the ball as well. But I think here we can probably say he was more bowling all-rounder in this series anyway. But it was important, I think, for him, especially going forward as well, in conditions where he may not be used as much as a seamer, to then say, well, can I still cement my place as a bat who can still bowl a little bit in, say, the subcontinent, for example, as an option at least. And I think he did that towards the end of the series, which is really important. I think he's a very, very promising talent, and he is so tall. I don't know how tall he is. He was like 6'7", 6'8", but he bowls near 90 miles an hour at times, and he gets the ball to shape. I mean, what more do you want from an all-rounder? They've got a real gem, and hopefully he just stays fit, I think, is the biggest thing. And if he does, then they are pretty much sorted for quite a few years, I would imagine, with him. From an England point of view, I mean, I think obviously with the bowlers, I think we've touched a little bit on the selection, etc. I don't want to kind of hammer on too much about that, especially because I think for Jack Leach it's a bit harsh. I mean, he was not given a lot of confidence after getting dropped in the second test match. He came back, he got a few wickets, he's okay in some instances, and some other instances not as well. But for the batsmen, I mean, Ollie Pope we touched upon. The opening pair, I mean, going forward, I mean, what are they going to do? I'm assuming they're going to stick, they'll probably play him in the Caribbean, I would assume.
I'm not sure he will.
I was thinking they'll give him one more series. The only issue I have is that his low hands are probably not accustomed to Australia or the Caribbean, and that's why he probably played quite well on the subcontinent. And what do they do? Because Burns as well, they seem to have lost confidence in him. And Crawley, I think, is now going... Well, he would have definitely cemented one of the opening spots for at least another series or two, I would imagine, at least. They see him as a long-term option, I think, now going forward. What do you think is going to happen with that whole situation now?
Well, to be honest, Faizan, I don't think anyone knows, apart from those in the England camp, to be honest, because there's so many options. From reports, at least in the media, it's been said that neither Burns nor Hamid will be on that flight to the Caribbean, so we could expect a brand new opening pairing. In terms of the front runners, Alex Lees is one of those. First class average of 34, been outstanding for Durham for a couple of years now. It was good for Yorkshire as well before that. So he's definitely a prime candidate for the opening slot for England. With regards to Crawley, and I think Crawley has got a very, very high ceiling. You know, the way in which he scores his runs, he's very elegant. He displays a panache when it comes to his game, which is fantastic for us as fans to view. But even then, I mean, we're saying about him cementing his opening spot because that's 77 in Sydney. And yet he still averages in the mid-20s opening the batting. People, may I just say, in 2021, I go back to that pattern with Dom Sibley, they hammered him into the ground for averaging 28.94. His average as an opener is better than Zach Crawley's. So I think Dom Sibley will come back into the fold. And maybe, who knows, we could see those two as the openers, a bit of fire and ice per se. From an English perspective, we've seen it beforehand. They haven't had the worst of records. I know that it's definitely better than Crawley and Burns' records together. So that could be a potential option. In terms of the fourth option, one which I think is a bit risky for the time being, but I do think he has an England future, is Rob Yates from my county of Warwickshire, nicknamed the Moseley Maestro. As we know him on the County Cricket Podcast, scored 793 runs, Warwickshire's leading run scorer in this year's county championship, scored a century at Lords in the Bob Willis Trophy final on the Sky Sports cameras. He's a very gritty customer. He's got fights, he's got fortitude, he's got resilience. But for the time being, I just feel like with him, it's a case of he either goes really big or he doesn't score at all. He'll score a massive 120, 130, and then in the next innings, he might score 5. Now, for me as a Warwickshire fan, I don't really mind that because I'm accustomed to it. As England fans, he would get torn to pieces by the media. So I think for the time being, maybe having him in and around the squad as a learning opportunity would be ideal. And of course, let him play for the England Lions, but I don't think he's ready just yet. So for the Caribbean and for the summer, I imagine that Zach Crawley will open, and if reports are to be believed, it'll be Crawley and Alex Lees. But I do think Dom Sibley will be back in the mix. He's worked incredibly hard on his technical flaws towards the latter parts of the season.
Very interesting. No, yeah, I'm a big fan of him. I think he's obviously got some clear technical flaws.
I feel bad for him. Can I just say, Faizan? I didn't really mention Hasib. I feel so bad for him. I feel like he's been set up to fail. I really do. The guy in 2019 had a horrid year at Lancs, was released by the club because they no longer wanted him. 2020, he comes to Nottinghamshire, has a really good season. And again, in 2021, has a very promising season up the top alongside Ben Slater. But I think they rushed him in far too early. And we knew that. Anyone who watched county cricket could see that hand position. It was the one thing that was getting him into trouble on slightly bouncier tracks. And you're going to Australia, which has the bounciest tracks on the entire planet. I feel awful for him. I really do, because you could argue at both points when he's come into that England side in both 2016 and 2021, it wasn't an ideal time for him. He's been rushed back in, and I think that is going to really, really hinder his development, because that's now 2 times he's been in that England setup. Hasn't got a dreadful record, but he hasn't quite impressed compared to other options, and that will hamper his chances heading into the future, because automatically, if you're a selector, you go, oh, this guy's already had 2 chances, hasn't quite taken them, we'll go for another option. So that, again, in terms of the selection for this Ashes, I wasn't a fan of at all, and I feel really, really bad for him, and sincerely hope that he can just gather some form back, get into some rhythm, get some momentum, and in 2 to 3 years' time, if not 4 years' time, really make a viable push for that England opening spot.
Yeah, it's a big shame, because he's got the mental fortitude, I think, in terms of the grittiness and the, I think, skill set to be a successful Test opener. We've seen it. I think the issue that he has is, as you mentioned, is that technical flaw. His hands are just, especially off the back foot, his hands are so far in front of him, and like nowhere near. When you talk about being tight in your guard, and then also your defensive. Your forward defensive, your backward defensive, whatever you want to call it, back for defense. His hands are literally out here when they should be right by his body, like killing the ball. And you see the best players do that. Root's very good at playing it like that. Williamson is like the classic example of doing that. And he's just off balance, and it's almost weird. Both his legs go back as he's out there, and he's got caught on the bouncy tracks, as you said, and it just. Someone made a comment, I think it might be in a commentator, said, how has someone not worked on this with him? Because it's a clear flaw. So either someone at Notts or someone in the England setup have worked on it with him, and he just either hasn't listened or he has listened, but he's gone back to type at times and he's finding it really hard to adjust, or they just haven't bothered working on it with him. And to me, after hearing the Ollie Pope story as well, it's almost like I'm thinking it might be the latter, as if in the England setup, they haven't bothered. They just said, well, he looks quite good in the nets, and they haven't really looked at him from a really technical point of view. And it's weird because you would imagine with Morgan and the white ball setup, they seem very technical. With the red ball setup, I don't know how much is really being put into that. And maybe it is, and I'm just talking rubbish, who knows? But from what we've seen in terms of results, it doesn't seem that way at all. And it's weird because he had 220-plus scores, I think, in the first Ashes test where he looked quite good. He looked like the best bat apart from Root. And I was just thinking, look, he just needs to get a 50-plus score. If he does, then that's it. Like, he'll have form. He got out in those 20s, and then he just went on and had a horrible series. And that's unfortunately the way it goes sometimes. But that's clearly a flaw. He got a couple of good deliveries as well, and that happens because they're one of the best bowling attacks. Well, they're probably the best bowling attack in those conditions. But unfortunately, as you said, I think it's going to take him a bit of time now to get back in, which is a huge shame because they could really do with him, especially in the subcontinent, etc. But being a test opener nowadays, you need to be able to play in all conditions, and I think that's something that he needs to work out. So hopefully he does, and sooner rather than later. To end, I guess, then we'll go to. I thought we'd have a bit of break before touching on the county format and everything. And I know you can talk about this for hours, so we'll try and keep it relatively brief. But for you, obviously, there's the massive, obviously Chris Silverwood and Joe Root have said it enough times in the past week or so that things need to change, and the format of the county championship, and whether it should be throughout the whole year and should be more competitive, and we need to be getting pitches that are better for the batsmen so they can score bigger runs in parts of the season and have more challenges, and obviously the spinners then come into their own as well, more etc. etc. I know you've touched on it before, but for those who haven't heard it, I mean, what are your thoughts, first of all? I know that you agree with some of what has been said. How would you change it? Obviously, you're the expert being the County Cricketer podcast. I mean, what do you think needs to be changed from a test cricket point of view? Because at the moment, I think it being in two blocks isn't the best. We've discussed this before. How do they change it in a viable way? Because clearly there's all this white ball stuff going on as well to actually help going forward.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the word expert there, Faizan, because I don't think anyone actually is. If I'm being completely honest, no team has mastered the art of creating a perfect domestic circuit, because there'd be one team in world cricket right now, and this has been going on for years, who would dominate proceedings. And what happens instead? We have cycles. We have cycles of dominance. We have cycles of adversity. And that's something, when this entire conversation comes into it, I don't think quite gets taken into consideration as much. Sport is cyclical. You can't always be the best team in the world. And you can have the strongest domestic pathways, the best pitches, the best squads, the best balls, the best everything. Again, if you aren't applying yourself on that big stage, that's all worthless. So I think with regards to county cricket, there are definite changes, and one of them is scheduling. And we've had those fixtures out today. That is such an important part. And I'll just give you some great stats, courtesy of a friend of ours from the podcast, Dan Kingdom. He's a Somerset fan. So in 2000, between the 16th of June and the 16th of August, which we call in this country the height of summer, so when conditions are at their best for playing cricket, in particular red ball cricket, we had an aggregate of 224 days of red ball cricket being played across the 18 counties. In 2004, the year after the T20 Cup came into fruition, that dropped to 172. Then if you look in the 2010s, we had 2016, which was the peak at 188 days, compared to 2021, which obviously we've had to have 4 tournaments now because the 100 has come into it. It's taken up that prime real estate during the summer holidays. Just 68 days worth of red ball county cricket across 18 counties. It's ridiculous. That is absolutely insane. And to their credit, I suppose, with the ECB, they have upped that. They've increased it. They've doubled the number of rounds. For most counties, it's 4 rounds this summer. I know that Warwickshire, as a Warwickshire fan, we've got 5 rounds in that summer period. So that is something which they've implemented. That should have happened years ago. And again, I've heard this quite often in this series about the obsession with the Ashes. Where was this talk after we lost to New Zealand or after we lost to India? Why is it only just came up now? Why is it only just happened now? Why is it always the Australia tour, which is the catalyst for this conversation? And it's because we care so intensely about it. It's almost this knee-jerk reaction. If I was to tell you the overall record between these two sides, right, at the moment, in Ashes cricket since 1882, Australia have won 34 series, England have won 32, and 6 have been drawn. If the Sheffield Shield was that much better than the county circuit in this country, Australia would be leagues ahead. They'd have 40 or 50 series wins, and yet they don't. And another key fact, since 2001, Australia have not won an away Ashes series. So why the Australian media, a bit like ours, not coming out here with interviews and reports and questioning the validity of Sheffield Shield cricket? Should we be increasing the number of teams because we're not winning away in England? And yet when it comes to us and Ashes away performances, and yes, the performances have not been good at all. 2013 was 5-0, 2017 was 4-0. This is yet another 4-0. We haven't won an Ashes game since 2011. But why was this not put in years ago? In 2017, I'll never ever forget the interview, because at the time, Paul Farbrace, who's now actually done a fantastic job at Warwickshire, love Farby, he's a great guy, but I think he was quoted in an interview after the Ashes that England were going to implement a 4-year plan to best set us up for 2021. Where was it? That'd be my question. And obviously Paul Farbrace, he took up the Warwickshire role. He couldn't implement that. So where was it? What was the plan for this Ashes series? If it was to reconfigure the English red ball circuit, they didn't do that. Instead, they pushed it to the peripheries. They didn't change the ball. They didn't change the scheduling. The pitches were the exact same. There's still not this, universal pitch inspection kind of thing where they have gradings and ratings for pitches. We don't have that in this country. You do get quite often examples of result pitches which have lots of greenery on them because teams want to avoid relegation. They need the points, and that's what they do in order to give themselves as good a chance as possible to win. All of these issues are still there. And you can palm it off on county cricket. You can say get rid of some of the counties. You can say bring in franchise cricket. I don't think that's going to work, personally speaking. And again, Faizan, I'm aware in terms of time we don't have enough. We need a completely separate episode for that alone. But in terms of short-term things that we can put in place, the scheduling they've done, fantastic. I know some people would argue that we need to do more. But then again, you've got to think of the cash cows, which are the 100 and the T20 Blast. They also need real estate in order for the counties and the ECB to bring in some revenue. So there's that, I suppose. You've got the pitches as well. As I said, I would want a universal system which allows us to have the best pitches possible in this country. You can't get every single one the same, and this is something in the UK which some people from outside of the circuit won't understand. There are certain grounds, such as the Riverside up in Durham, such as New Road in Worcester, where climatic conditions don't allow for the best, the bounciest pitches in the country. They don't have the luxury of having a hybrid pitch like Edgbaston or Old Trafford or Lords, right? Lords isn't a hybrid, but it's a top quality pitch. Edgbaston and Old Trafford do have hybrid wickets. So pitches are another thing. The third thing, I've mentioned it already, get rid of that blame culture. Someone needs to come in outside of the setup, I think, and take English cricket by the reins. We need leadership. Passing the buck, passing the blame, and not accepting your own flaws, your own mistakes, isn't leadership. We need someone to come in now, choose a direction, go with it, give it full backing, and let's take this team into the future and let's get competitive again. I don't know what that direction is going to be because, funnily enough, at the age of 20, I don't think I'm going to be selected as England's head coach or the new CEO of the England and Wales Cricket Board. But whoever comes in, that is their role and they have got to fulfill it. So that's the third one. And the fourth one as well, I suppose, heading into the future, does regard selection. I think we need some actual selectors. Chris Silverwood, a lot of people have been critical, I suppose myself included, in this show. But the fact is, it's a tremendous amount of responsibility to not only be the head coach, but also be the chief selector. He should not have both roles. That's not on at all. You don't see that in Australia. You don't see that in South Africa or Pakistan or the West Indies, a lot of other countries have selectors. They watch county cricket, they choose the best of the best for that time. And I don't think that that should be the responsibility of England's head coach. So if I was to have a bit of a rejig, a reshuffle, that would be top of my agenda, or at least towards the top. We need actual selectors who are watching county cricket intently. They're watching the England Lions. They're looking at how these players are developing. And then I think we'll get better in terms of the selection process and give ourselves the best chance going forward. So those are my ideas, Faizan. But again, it's very subjective. I'm aware that some people will agree with me. Some people say you're chatting absolute rubbish. We need franchise cricket. We need to get rid of the counties. This, that, the other. But then again, when it comes to county cricket in this country, not only has it existed for 132 years, the first ever championship was in 1890. Not only has it produced a World Cup winning side just 3 years ago, we're still the world champions, for those who don't know. It's won a T20 World Cup in 2010. We've been the number one ranked side. We've won away Ashes series. County cricket with proper backing from that board can produce good players. It won't guarantee success because no one is entitled to success. That's through hard work, application, and determination. But with proper backing, proper support, proper nurturing, that's how I think English cricket can go forward.
And that's, folks, is how England get to number one.
It's not guaranteed, though. We might not. But you've got to give yourself the best chance. That's the key thing. If you said it right at the start, if you don't buy a ticket, you can't win the lottery.
Yeah, put your best foot forward for sure. Didn't Chris Silverwood want to be selector as well, didn't he? Wasn't that why they did it?
I think he did, but why was that made? Why was that decision made? It's so much power for one person to have. And again, it's so much pressure. It's so much pressure. Not only is he responsible from a coaching perspective, but also the selection. He's only one person, right? You need multiple people with different viewpoints because otherwise you do get certain biases. So,
but that's why it's even laughable. That's why it's even more laughable that he's not accepting any blame and he's kind of just deflecting it onto the county championship, because now he's wanted that power, right? He said, "Oh, look, we're going to do better if I'm head coach and selector," and then he's now head coach and selector, and then they lose, and it's like, it's not my fault. It's like, what? But how much more power can we give you to make it your fault then, right? What, as in, you know, when are you going to accept blame? But yeah, I totally take on what you said as well about the format, and it's a very good point about the number of Ashes series won from both. I think, as you rightfully pointed out, though, I think the issue has been the manner of defeats that England have lost in Australia away. But in saying that, England have not won many series away from home anyways for a very long time, apart from that one series, obviously, was where they had Swan and Anderson and Peterson, etc., and Trott. It's been pretty much the same story every time. It's actually the Ashes here which has been more competitive. And when I say more competitive, England have still had the edge, but Australia have at least won at least a test match, right? They haven't been getting drubbed here in England. So I think that's why it's been more exciting to watch. But the biggest thing, I think, from an English perspective is, as you said, there's just been absolutely no planning in place. And there was this talk about a 4-year plan and putting it in place. I think all the eggs have been put into one basket, and that's white ball cricket. And there has been some success, and that's understandable. But in terms of, if we're looking at it from a specific red ball point of view, it's been horrific. I mean, it looks like they've just chucked a team together and said, go on, try and do something with the players you've got, but absolutely no thought put into it. And also, it's laughable that Silverwood and Root bring it up now after they've lost. Where was this talk a year and a half ago? As you said, when they lost to New Zealand and India, that was fine. Why is that fine? You've lost at home. So why is that fine? You've literally lost
not only
at home.
The first time that not only 2 losses, but the first time that England have failed to win any home test series since 2001. So the first time in 20 years, and yet this point wasn't raised. And I kind of agree in a way. I love the Ashes. And for me, I know you'll disagree. You'll say Pakistan, India. But I do think in terms of the history, the pedigree, the heritage surrounding this particular series, at least from a cricketing perspective only, I view this as the big one. I think it's the biggest one on the planet, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And actually, on the Sky Sports Cricket Vodcast, I think it was Nasu mentioned this. When it came to Andy Flower, not only did he prepare them with a brutal boot camp in Germany, brutal. If you want to see it, you can see it on The Edge. Great documentary surrounding Andy Flower's reign as England coach. But in the lead up to that, he put an embargo on the players about mentioning the Ashes. You only mention the series, which is in front of you. Because the Ashes, look, at the end of the day, for someone outside of England, is just another series. So maybe that's what we need, a fresh set of eyes in order to set us up as well as possible, per se, heading into the next away series.
I agree. I think there's a huge amount of emphasis put on the Ashes, and as you said, I can understand why to a degree, but I think it's almost blasé about other series, and it's like you're happy to get stuffed at home by New Zealand and India and say, well, that's fine as long as we go away and we win the Ashes. But then what happens when you don't win it? Then now what's going to happen? You're just going to sit there and say, but
county cricket, it's always county cricket as well, And as I said, there's not enough time, Faizan, to go through. Yeah. I'll be here for about 10 hours. There's honestly so much to discuss. I understand that. But I just think it's such an easy thing to pass the buck onto. It's a circuit which has worked for years. It does have its shortcomings. I admit that. And we need to do a lot of work in county cricket to make it more accessible, to make it more inclusive as well. But in terms of the actual domestic setup itself, it has absolutely no reasoning, or at least no impact, no influence on you throwing away your wicket in Australia. That's all that I have to say.
Yeah, no, very well said. And I think at the right time to end it there. Thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate you coming on. I did say it would only be half an hour and it's been double that amount. So apologies.
The problem with me. It's never half an hour.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, luckily we have a Spotify as well, so I can upload it onto there. So for once, rather than just feeling bad about chucking all my YouTube subscribers onto listening to it, so that's good. Yeah, guys, of course, do check out the County Cricket podcast, on Spotify and all podcast platforms, and also do check them out on YouTube as well. They've got a YouTube channel and some nice little bits on there, and you can see Aaron's lovely face on there as well in quite a few of them.
I've always been told, Faizan, face for radio.
face for radio. Yeah, but what was it? You got a voice for radio. So that's no old joke. But yeah, people say, I say that the question of cricket, isn't it? Question of cricket?
Yes, that's returning next week.
Yes, is really good. It's a really good fun watch, which I was also part of the first episode, so you can check me out on there. Be horrendous on there, but if you want to have a laugh. But yeah, thanks, Aaron. Is there anything you want to touch on before we wrap up?
Well, to be honest, not really too much. Just thank you very much again, Faizan, for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure, and just a message, I suppose, for the Women's Ashes and England at the Under-19 World Cup. Just wishing those two respective sides all the very best of luck. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they can give us something to smile about, as well as the men on, in this upcoming West Indies T20I series, which I'll be watching with intent.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Very well said. Right. Well, thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much.